Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm George Malim, the Managing Editor of Vanilla Plus. Today's topic goes right to the heart of the future of the mobile business and perhaps the future of all business. It examines why 5G transformations necessitate individualized approaches and integrated strategies. I'm delighted to welcome today's panelists. We have with us Roberto Company, the Senior Analyst at Analysys Mason, Vikas Dhingra, the Senior Consultant at Bell Labs Consulting, and Helmut Schober, the Manager of Strategic Business Development at Nokia. These speakers are going to talk about all of the issues involved in 5G transformations and also where we are in the market now. However, before I hand over the floor to them, I'd emphasize that this webinar is an interactive session and you'll have the opportunity to ask our speakers questions after their presentations. Simply enter your questions into the panel on the screen at any time and I'll put them to our speakers later. Finally, to set the scene, I have a poll question to present to you, which will talk about the situation that you see in the market in terms of the commercialization of 5G. The question is, when do you expect commercial 5G deployment to happen? And the possible responses are before 2020, between 2020 and 2022, and 2023 and beyond. So I'll read the question again. When do you expect commercial 5G deployment to happen? And option 1 is before 2020. Option 2 is between 2020 and 2022. And the third and final option is 2023 and beyond. Let's see what the responses are. And quite an impressive, almost 3/4 of respondents feel that 2020 might be a little bit soon, but between 2020 and 2022 will be when commercial 5G deployments will begin to happen. I think that's probably something most of our panelists will take some encouragement from. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Roberto Company. Roberto, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, George. Great. Hello, everyone. So the first chart here we have is the metrics for the telecom industry. The revenue, the EBITDA, and the capex, which are the typical ones we look at. At this point, we say telecoms is having a little bit of a pause. We've seen big declines in revenue in the previous years, particularly in 2015, but that has now bottomed out. The chart shows a year-on-year change, and that revenue is now flat. We see some growth in some areas, such as, for example, Europe, but generally, the industry is becoming more profitable. EBITDA margin, or overall EBITDA, is growing, although there are some exceptions. And capex has fallen sharply in 2015 and again 2016. And we're projecting a slight fall in 2017. Now, if we take China out of the equation, capex is flat, and there is some big declines in China at the moment. So on this slide, we're going to put some more color into capex and capex trends worldwide. The green line shows capex intensity, which is capex over revenue, which has fallen from 19% to 17% in 2017 for telecom industry as a whole. The chart shows all fixed and wireless components together. Now we must bear in mind that for fixed network, fiber is a very important aspect of 5G. So capex has fallen by operator type. However, you can see also how the developed market still dominates. You can see how China part is still quite small, and it's quite big rather, and it's a considerable part. The Chinese operators have for many years worked at capital intensity of about 30%, which is quite considerable. Now, signals of future demand are quite weak, and we look at the revenue chart and we see some weak growth. It's a declining proportion of overall GDP. So that's why we say operators must prioritize their investments. They can't do everything. They can push into 4 different directions. They can do what they've done so far, build more fiber, build more cellular networks such as 4.5G and 5G, and take benefits from that. They can extend their connectivity, that is geographical extension, and make sure there is 4G coverage, for example, everywhere, or FTTH everywhere. They can diversify their services, which operators have been trying to do for years and years, or some investment going into defending margins, transforming systems to reduce operating costs. So operators have a number of different directions to push into. They can't do them all, and they must make some trade-offs. In general, you can say that if you're pushing towards the right, you're pushing towards the utility model of telecoms. And if you're pushing towards the left, you're pushing towards that cloud digital service model. Now, we know that 5G is on the horizon. It will happen at some point, not quite sure when. It will happen because leading operators need to differentiate. It will happen because vendor push might be a factor. And investor and consumer perception is difficult to ignore. And we can't say we won't do 5G. For example, non-standalone fixed wireless access will push 5G anyway. On the other hand, there's no obvious revenue case. There are use cases that people talk about, great stuff like virtual reality that people talk about. But if we do stand back a little bit and think about the ecosystem, we need to know what the business model is and where the money is. And if you're an investor looking into this, you need to understand which direction the money is flowing and how big that flow is. And at the moment, there is little in terms of co-investment. So, flowing on from this, and this goes back to the poll question, we at Analysys Mason do regular surveys of about 100 Tier 1 and Tier 2 operators. We, on regular basis, speak to executives and ask them about deployment plans and technology shifts that they're planning for. In this case, we asked them about when they believe 5G network deployments will start, and great majority said, 92% of them said, beyond 2020, which is in line with our poll today. Now we have to remember, 5G is not just about the radio, although that is an important part. And for reasons mentioned before, operators may delay investment in 5G. Now, the lack of standards and ecosystem readiness, such as handsets and devices, is also an issue. Release 15 of the 3GPP standards, the first release of 5G, will happen in 2 steps. The non-standalone will be released at the end of this year, while the standalone will be by mid-2018. So you see, there's likely to be several years of delay, perhaps around 5 years, for most mobile operators to start 5G deployments. Now, however, it is important for operators to start planning today and seek vendor support in developing roadmaps. So, Cloud RAN is a good example of network transformation, which requires long-term planning by operators and requires vendor support. In Cloud RAN, radio functions are virtualized and centralized, enabling resources to be allocated flexibly. Our survey of operators has revealed that most find the benefits of this technology compelling, particularly in terms of operating cost efficiencies, as well as supporting service agility. Now, the baseband processing resource can be shared in many ways, and 2 main key approaches are possible. On the one hand, we have the centralized RAN, which is an evolution of the established concept of base station hotels, where several radio units are connected to single BBU, sharing its resources flexibly. On the other hand, we have the Cloud RAN, which establishes functional splits between remote and shared resources. This means the latter is virtualized and deployed in virtual network functions on a server or in the cloud. And also, Cloud RAN is greatly dependent on availability of fiber network. Now, for fixed wireless access, given that there is no mobility component, fixed wireless access is one of the first use cases possible for 5G. The use of millimeter wave spectrum in 5G will deliver gigabits of data throughput. 5G fixed wireless access will enable mobile operators to directly challenge cable operators and provide substitutes for FTTH broadband services to homes and businesses. Vendors will also have an important role to play in providing the equipment and the service, such as planning and optimization. A demo, which you can see here, I attended earlier this summer, showcased a CPE, consumer premise equipment, at the window pointing to an antenna about 250 meters away. It delivered a speed of about 1.2 gigabits per second over 200 megahertz of spectrum using MIMO antennas. Now, the advantage of this using MIMO antennas is it delivers this rate of speed to each user, thereby increasing the spectral efficiency, unlike a mobile in a macro environment which shares the overall cell speed. Fixed wireless access provides a shorter time to market. There is less need to dig up the roads and the streets. There can also be lower cost than FTTP, but not always. There are also some drawbacks. For example, huge line of sight losses given the high spectrum frequency bands used, the building penetration losses, although this particular demo it was a line of sight, and the signal doesn't go well through brick walls, and this might make some speed unpredictable. And this has a higher OPEX cost than FTTP. So now I would hand over to Helmut.
Thank you, Roberto. Hello, my name is Helmut Schober. I'm leading the 5G program in the Nokia Global Services Organization. With me is Vikas Dhingra from Bell Labs Consulting. Today we would like to share with you some recent examples of 5G projects that Nokia and Bell Labs have been doing with leading operators from across the globe. Nokia and Bell Labs have been working closely together for a long time to advise operators on 5G and to plan together with them the right strategies for preparing for 5G. This is not just a technology issue, but on the contrary, it is especially the related business transformation that operators would like to understand, and where currently they see the biggest need to learn more. This is why we, Nokia and Bell Labs, have developed a systematic and holistic consulting and transformation approach that prepares operators for 5G. This starts with the 5G vision and strategy, identifies the implications for their target, for their network, designs a target network architecture, prepares transformation planning, and goes all the way to end-to-end network deployment. This is to ensure that operators are ready to take advantage of the opportunities and to overcome any challenges they may face. Why is this migration to 5G seen as such a challenge, and how is it different from previous migrations to 3G or 4G? Roberto in his presentation has already hinted at some of the new challenges. 5G can create an explosion of opportunities, many new use cases, entirely new markets that can be addressed, completely new business models, all that on top of the more traditional businesses that operators are already addressing today. But exploiting those opportunities will require some change. The success in this new world will be shaped by how an operator transforms its business and chooses from the new business models and use cases. Transformation to 5G world must therefore begin not with the technology of 5G, but with the use cases. By deciding right now which use cases to target, operators can start to invest in the technologies they need to lay down the foundations for the right deployment of 5G. Moving to this new 5G-driven world will be a lengthy and sometimes complex journey. But it will also be a profitable one because an operator invests in the technologies that will enable these opportunities. And not to forget, the new network architecture being created, supported by transformed operations, will substantially drive down the operator's cost per bit. So it can be the best of both worlds, more business revenue and falling costs, combining to boost profitability to new levels. With that, I would like to hand over to Vikas to talk us through some very concrete customer cases and project examples.
Okay, thank you, Helmut. As Helmut has said, Nokia and Ballas Consulting have been looking into dynamics of 5G introduction for more than a year now. This includes examination of relevant drivers and challenges to answer key questions like why 5G, which use cases, what is the business rationale behind introducing 5G, what technologies to deploy in the short to medium term, and finally, what are the next concrete steps to take on this journey to 5G. To start with, we performed techno-economic analysis of typical 5G use cases using an exhaustive set of proprietary analytical models. The result of this analysis was shared in Mobile World Congress earlier this year, and on October 4th, an interactive self-simulation tool was released. In this tool, one can perform sensitivity analysis to examine impact of key drivers on technology and economic benefits of 5G while we compare it with 4G evolutions like 4.5G and 4.9G. For example, impact of take rate on higher resolution video streaming and AR/VR services on end user quality of experience can be analyzed. It can be observed that 5G is rather a superior technology to offer extreme mobile broadband services at commercial scale in these high-capacity venues. Recently, we were also engaged in an extensive analysis of an urban area in Western Europe and trial deployments in the US to understand economics of 5G-based fixed wireless access solutions. Objective of these engagements were really to examine trade-offs between broadband performance, speed of deployment, and costs while comparing these fixed wireless access solutions with alternate technologies like XDSL, cable, and FTTH. Our analysis shows that a valid business case can be established based upon the use of millimeter wave spectrum, and performance achieved by 5G can match that of fiber to the home technologies. However, reducing the target throughput creates a business model that is even competitive with cable and XDSL technologies, while offering performance that supports the broadband needs of a wide variety of connected households, which are mainly driven by TV and other video services. We recently completed an engagement with a Tier 1 operator in APAC, where objective was to analyze 5G requirements for selected set of use cases and define target 5G network architecture to realize these specific use cases. We started the analysis with identification of use cases that justify investment considering this specific operator's techno-economic environment. Transformation journey to 5G, including no-regret moves in the short to medium term, was the goal. And maximizing the return on invested capital for LTE infrastructure was a key requirement that was put for this analysis. We performed an end-to-end analysis of the network that includes the radio access network, transport, and the mobile core network. For radio access network, our analysis shows that depending upon the deployed density, the specific frequency bands, and the deployed LTE infrastructure, a large portion of an existing LTE macro grid can rather be reused to host 5G sites. From a spectrum perspective, an operator will need mix of less than 6 GHz and centimeter wave frequency bands to cater and capacity and coverage requirements of different use cases. It is rather important to consider the amount of bandwidth available especially in less than 6 GHz 5G bands so as to ensure a differentiated experience by 5G. As far as the transport is concerned, it is highly driven by specific requirements of the selected use cases. Operator will need high-capacity backhaul networks at the edge or even at the localized locations, say, to support hotspots like, say, stadiums or venues. Similarly, Cloud RAN architecture, as Roberto was talking about, with different split options, drives the transport requirements for front-haul and mid-haul access networks. As far as the mobile core network is concerned, target end-to-end latency and aggregate throughput of these selected 5G use cases will play a critical role in determining what is the level of distribution that is required in the mobile core networks. For mobile core, one of the most important points to consider is whether to continue leveraging LTE-EPC or deploy 5G next generation core. Now here we have seen that time to market, diversity of the different use cases that an operator is planning to deploy, 5G coverage requirements, and support for mobility are some of the key factors that need careful examination in identifying the optimized deployment option, and thereby the transformation journey to 5G. This example is for a Tier 1 operator in Western Europe, which is planning to deploy 5G as an overlay technology for wide area coverage. In this case, the operator plans to start with offering evolved mobile broadband services. Nokia and Ballaz Consulting performed a quick techno-economic analysis simulating multiple scenarios and configurations so as to find the most optimized 5G evolution path. Sensitivity analysis was done, which included key parameters like amount of spectrum, penetration of 5G end user terminals, their capabilities in time to come, advantages of massive MIMO with varying number of antennas, and the user demand growth, as it will grow over the period of time. This was done to examine capacity and coverage requirements for this 5G overlay system. As an alternative, we also considered an incremental spend in LTE through higher order carrier aggregation and more number of antenna streams was examined. Results of the analysis show that for this specific operator, with the bandwidth that it has and that it plans to acquire in time to come, and with the traffic growth, 5G is rather essential to satisfy impending demand of what I call next generation mobile broadband. That includes high resolution video services, services like augmented reality and virtual reality and these kind of things, including fixed wireless access. However, it is equally important to continue expanding LTE infrastructure in the near term so as to serve growing demand of video services. With this, I hand over to Helmut to talk about our recent engagement with KT and use cases.
So planning for the Winter Olympics in Korea is another example. Nokia and Korea Telecom have been working closely together to prepare for the deployment of the world's first mobile 5G network in South Korea. Korea Telecom plans to use the Winter Olympics to demonstrate new 5G services. Services that they want to demonstrate are SyncView, which is live video streaming in ultra high definition quality, 360-degree virtual reality, 3D holographic TV, as well as applications in 5G safety. All these services require extremely high data rates and network capacity. Depending on the service, requirements for download data rates vary from 40 to 100 megabits per second. Uplink data rates, for example, for high-quality live streams from 360 virtual reality cameras, can reach gigabits per second levels. To reach such high data rates, high frequencies, in this case in the 28 gigahertz range, had to be used. Nokia and Bellabs have been planning the deployments for the Olympic sites. This includes the outdoor areas in the Pyeongchang Olympic Park, as well as indoors in one of the Olympic stadiums. To cover the Olympic area, so here you see the 3D animation of the Olympic area in Pyeongchang. Katie wanted to reuse the existing LTE sites to the largest extent possible. As a detailed 3D simulation demonstrated, co-siting 5G with LTE macro sites indeed provided relatively good coverage. Coverage in the area of 90% could be reached. However, due to the propagation characteristics of the high frequencies, line of sight is essential. So blocking from buildings as well as even vegetation can create problems and can cover certain areas. So additional 5G sites are required and need to be planned in exact locations. Through 3D simulations, those additional sites could be identified and the coverage could be extended to reach 95%. In this case, 95% additional sites were required to achieve that coverage of 95%. Indoor planning, such as here for the ice stadium, is another challenge and a very different one. 28 GHz is a good fit for dense indoor deployment as it allows to reach extremely high capacity and the data rates with a low number of access points. However, the antenna location is critical because interference needs to be minimized and blockages is a problem. In this case, the service bridges near the ceiling provided ideal antenna locations. Overall, 12 indoor small sites have been required to offer data rates of between 40 and 200 megabits per second to cover or to reach over 1,000 5G terminals. Is that Amit, please? Vikas, please.
Thanks, Amit. As can be seen till now, 5G target network architecture and thereby the transformation journey depends highly on the specific use case requirements. Thus, we believe that use case driven approach helps solving the uncertainties around 5G introduction. Nokia and Bell Labs Consulting have developed this set of 5G acceleration services to help operators prepare for 5G by making objective decisions on when and how to make the required network investment and provide support as they prepare for the operational changes that will be required. 5G acceleration services consist rather three set of services. The first is building a solid business case, where we help in creating a strategy for step-by-step transformation of the network, operations, and business. We support the operator in ensuring optimized use of spectrum, introducing new business models, and clarifying business rationale for deploying 5G. The second set of services is around planning the 5G network and operations, where objective is to understand and prepare for the impact of 5G on end-to-end network architecture and operations. And lastly, planning that 5G transformation through range of services, including cross-domain architecture for 5G and an end-to-end network design services. As operators carry out this journey to 5G, it is critical that they lay the right foundation. We assist in identifying and executing these non-regret moves, including telco cloud operations, RAN modernization, cloud RAN planning, IoT platform strategy, data center deployment, and more importantly, assimilation of end-to-end security, analytics, and automation in their networks. We would rather like to understand your unique challenges in transforming towards 5G and would like to have this important conversation to discuss about 5G, what are the challenges both in terms of business and technical challenges that we might have, and have a structured approach to tackle these challenges and rather start the journey towards 5G. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Vikas. That was an excellent presentation, and thanks also to Helmut and Roberto for your input. I'm now going to open the floor to questions and answers. We've already had some in, but there's still plenty of time, so do feel free to type in a question in the panel on your screen, and I will put it to our speakers. The first question I'm going to take is one that I'm going to direct to Vikas. The question is the business model challenge more difficult than the technical challenge? Vikas, what's your view on which challenge is more difficult?
Yeah, thanks, George. I would rather say business model aspects are as important as considering the technical aspect we have discussed. From a business model aspect, there are basically two things that need to be considered. The first is, as we just discussed, the initial services would be around enhanced mobile broadband, where you are offering, let's say, high-resolution video, 4K streaming, AR, VR, and things like that. The important point over there is how do you monetize these new services as they come on board. And next point is, as 5G enables new services which are in new verticals, let's say automotive verticals, manufacturing, healthcare, and whatnot. The important point is how do you enter these markets? What's the right business model? What's the right partnerships the operators have to get into? What is their role in the value chain? I think these are some important questions that need to be considered and then taken into consideration as they move towards 5G.
Great, thank you, Vikas. Excellent, we've had some more questions coming in, but do keep them coming. The next question I would like to ask, I'm going to direct to Helmut. Helmut, we were talking about fixed wireless access during the presentation. Do you see fixed wireless access as the killer 5G app?
Well, I would see fixed wireless definitely as the first application that is going to be deployed by operators, but it remains basically a niche application. It is a very specific application, which makes perfect sense in specific environments, but not in every single scenario. What most operators are planning to do is to start deploying 5G with fairly traditional broadband services. So they would initially use 5G to enhance existing broadband services with more capacity, higher quality, and drive revenues through that. Longer term, I guess we will see the true potential of 5G through more innovative use cases. Some of those have been discussed here. Some of them operators like KT and others are experimenting with, but it will probably still take some time to for entirely new use cases, entirely new business models to get traction. Where the real potential is in use cases like industry automation, supporting the health industry, even driving self-driving cars and other applications. Those are entirely new applications with entirely new revenue opportunities, but it will take some years for those new applications to take hold and to really reach traction.
Thank you, Helmut. I mean, I guess it's an interesting sort of two-stage approach, because on one hand, the operators want to generate revenue to justify the investment in 5G, and on the other hand, they recognize that 5G is a transformative technology that will have lots of relevance to other industries, and that's a question that we've had, in fact, and I'd like to bring Vikas in to answer this question. Vikas, the question is, how do you include the business models of verticals and evolutions like automotive and mass transportation within the 5G value chain? Vikas, what's your view on addressing the needs of verticals?
Yeah, for sure. I think there, if we see it from the operator's perspective, it is important that they work very closely with these verticals and understand the requirements. Now, one is playing the connectivity role, where with increasing connectivity, let's say, for example, in V2X connectivity in automotive and mass transportation, certainly there is a role that needs to be played for wide area connectivity. But beyond that, there are other aspects. If we consider services, maybe in-vehicle infotainment, content becomes a very important role over there. So that is one thing. And then there is more around what is the right, who is taking care of the customer relationship, who is into the payment model. So those kind of things where operators have, I would say, certain attributes which they can leverage. But more importantly, they have to partner and get into the right partnerships to play the right role in these different verticals as they go on.
Thanks, Vikas. I'd like to bring in Roberto here as well. Roberto, what's your view on, I guess, tailoring 5G to the business models of other verticals outside telecoms? Do you see a need for that to happen?
Yeah, so as Vikas was saying, we need to, in the whole industry, work together in terms of delivering what the particular verticals need. So if you take, for example, IoTs or Industry 4.0, which is more factory-based, understanding what are the needs, what are the connectivity needs, what are the radio needs, network slicing, for example, and how we can monetize each of those. And this can only happen if we work with the particular industry verticals and understanding their needs.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's part of the transformation journey, that this isn't just buy some connectivity, it's work together to create new business models. Having said that, before we can get there, we've got to take care of the basic fundamentals of coverage and building the networks. And we've had a question in, which I think I'd like to ask both Vikas and Helmut to give responses to. The question is, how will it be possible to deploy 5G outside of cities, because high frequencies have very small coverage areas and high site density would be very expensive. So, I guess the question is, how are we going to address the challenge of coverage outside of cities with 5G? So either Vikas or Helmut, please take the floor and answer that, please.
Yeah, again, it probably will be a combination. 5G does not necessarily have to be deployed at 28 gigahertz, like in some of the examples that we have presented before. Many operators, in fact, would like, at least initially, to deploy 5G at much lower frequencies, and the sub-6 gigahertz spectrum, so around 3 gigahertz in many cases, even going down to 700 megahertz or so. Again, it really depends on the use case. If the use case is to go for coverage, then lower frequencies obviously makes much more sense, especially if the operator has spectrum assets in that frequency range. If, however, the use case requires extreme data rates, then and the extreme capacity, like in some of the Korean use cases, for example, then there's no way around the higher frequency bands, even the multi-gigahertz range, and this is where you basically have to make a trade-off between coverage and capacity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand. Vikas, what's your view?
Yeah, exactly. So I would agree with this. So what we have seen with one of the recent engagements with an operator in APAC, as Helmut was saying, it entirely depends upon the use case that one is considering. If let's take an example for wide area coverage, then less than 6 gigahertz deployment with 5G make a lot of sense. In that case, we can see that a lot, depending upon the existing infrastructure, but if existing deployed grid is dense, a large part of deployed LT grid can be rather reused for deploying 5G. And then if you talk about dedicated, let's say, deployments in stadiums and venues and all, then centimeter wave or these bands can be really used, and there it's more of confined coverage requirements to provide ultra-high capacity. So that is one way of reusing your deployed infrastructure and continue investing in it to, let's say, deploy 5G early.
Thanks, Vikas. I've got a couple of questions together, which I think we're still in the fixed wireless access area. One question is, have you taken the civil works for fiber deployment to small cell radio sites into your model? So I guess that's a question that I'd put to Vikas or Helmut. What's the civil works? I guess are really important. After all, it's truck roll and people digging holes and running cable, and we all know that's expensive. So have you taken that aspect into your model when you consider it?
Yeah, exactly. So that's a very good point. So we have considered the civil works, and also including one is the cost part of it, but also the time to market that gets impacted by doing that whole civil works. And also there are regulatory constraints at times when you have to dig road, and can you dig on both sides of the road. So all those things have been considered when we do this comparison between a fixed wireless access, the last mile wireless versus a fiber.
Sure, and I guess there's a huge variation globally as well with the cost of those civil works depending on the cost of labour in each national market. So I suspect that's probably a case-by-case consideration that will have to be explored carefully from market to market. Anyway, moving on, but still relating to fixed wireless access, the question that's come in, I think this is probably one that Vikas is probably best placed to answer. The question is, what is the expected spectrum efficiency for an ideal fixed wireless access case, both for 4G and 5G? Which I think sounds quite a wide question. But Vikas, do you have any comment that you can make on that?
Yeah, it depends upon the specific scenarios. I would say the number of antennas considered, what is the deployment scenario. But at this level, at a generic level, I can say that with the technologies coming in 5G, be it some, I would say, native technologies in 5G, or with addition of massive MIMO, things like that, we see, benefits in terms of spectral efficiency with 5G, and that really helps 5G provide much better cost per bit advantages than I would say 4G or its evolution.
Okay, excellent. I've had another question regarding having 5G outside of cities, asking if it's acceptable to have a 1 millisecond delay budget in rural areas. Helmut, do you think it's acceptable to sort of budget for delay of that level?
Yeah, again, it depends on the use case. There are certain use cases where extreme low latency, so in the 1 millisecond range or so is required. Factory automation is one example. Another one is self-driving cars. 5G networks definitely support that, and that's one of the key reasons for rolling them out. But you do not necessarily have to go all the way to 5G. So advanced LTE 4.5, especially 4.9, also supports lower latency. However, not necessarily at the reliability rate that is required for some applications. So
yeah,
again,
sure. I mean, obviously,
with the use case, is low latency required, or is low latency in combination with high reliability required? If that is the case, then there's no way around 5G.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Helmut. Let's take another question now. I'd like to bring Roberto in on this question. Roberto, what do you see as the single greatest challenge associated with 5G deployment?
Well, like we said, at the moment, the lack of standards is one of the challenges. So, this is going to be in two phases. The first phase will be end of this year. The second, the standalone, will be middle of next year. So generally, the time it takes to develop a commercial product, that's also some time that we need to consider. On the other hand, to actually take all the advantages of 5G network, we need to have a cloud RAN network in order to gain all the efficiencies from the radio side, and that in itself is quite complicated. The need for extensive amount of fiber network is a challenge. So it all kind of bundles up together to deliver this final 5G network. We do need a number of things to happen from here onwards to get to that actual efficiency that 5G was designed for.
Sure. Thanks, Roberto. Same question. What do you see as the single greatest challenge associated with 5G deployment? And I'd like to ask that to Vikas or Helmut to respond to that, please.
Yeah, I guess it's really the careful planning. There are lots of things that need to be in place to ensure full 5G deployment, especially for the more innovative use cases. And you can't do all of that in a single step. You cannot do it because of the technical complexity, but you also can't do it probably for financial reasons. So what you need to do is carefully plan the migration path, the optimal migration path from a technical as well as from a commercial perspective, and plan this step-by-step approach. This is exactly what we are doing with operators, defining the target network architecture, but then also looking at the existing network, defining the stepping stones to get from A to B. Which has to be done, of course, under cost considerations and taking the business justification for every single step into account.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. There's just one more thing, Helmut. While I have you, I've got another question that I think is relevant. The question is, how do you upgrade the transport infrastructure so it's ready for 5G when that might involve having 100 gigabit per second connections when we currently typically have 1 gigabit connection in place? So, I mean, I guess that needs to be thought of as well.
Yeah, so the transport network is one of the foundations, again, for 5G, and something that you need to keep in mind. It doesn't make sense just to upgrade the radio network and forget about the rest of the network, and that's not going to work.
Sure.
So it needs careful end-to-end planning. On the other hand, it is probably not really necessary to upgrade the full transport network to full 100 gigabits per second or so. 5G is also a lot about re-architecturing and decentralizing the network for transport capacity, but probably even more so for latency reasons. You anyhow want to decentralize the network, decentralize the data centers, and bring them closer to the edge. So that and through careful planning, all the parts of the network, of the transport network, need to be upgraded to that high speed.
Great, thank you, Helmut. We're running a little bit short of time, but I've got a question that I think I'd like to close on by asking everyone this question. But I'll start with Roberto to answer first. And the question is, would you advise looking at 5G deployment as part of a wider digital transformation strategy? And that's to you, Roberto.
Yes, thanks. So in terms of wider digital transformation, that's absolutely right. I mean, operators need to understand their business case going forward. They need to reduce their costs going forward. And in terms of the core network or the RAN network, all this, like Helmut was saying, we need to decentralize and virtualize a lot of the processes and the operations. So all this will decrease your cost base. And 5G really is about decreasing your cost base to deliver all the services that is planned to be delivered.
Thank you, Roberto. I'll next ask that question to Vikas. The question is, would you advise looking at 5G deployment as part of a wider digital transformation strategy? Vikas.
Yeah, I would take it as this way that from an operator perspective, or IoT is going to be becoming a very important part of the offering, and that includes in rather a lot of verticals, whether it is healthcare or transport or manufacturing. So where the more and more things as they go from physical to digital, they have to be enabled, they have to be connected. Now, if we talk about 5G, it enables a lot of these applications through its high reliability, low latency, high flexibility kind of capabilities. So if you want to, let's say, offer these services, then 5G becomes a very good enabler, and that puts up a rather good business case for deploying 5G. And in the time to come, as all these devices and everything goes digital, the important aspect would be what is the cost to serve these billions of devices. It's become very important to lower down the cost to serve each new sensor that gets connected to the network. And thereby, the massive IoT use cases, which will be enabled by capabilities of 5G in time to come, will become very important. So rather, I would rather say yes, 5G is rather an important aspect as you consider a wider digital transformation.
Thank you, Vikas. And same question to Helmut. Helmut, the question is, would you advise looking at 5G deployment as part of a wider digital transformation strategy? Helmut, over to you.
Yeah, in the end, it all needs to get together and then fit together. New revenues will come from new use cases and new markets that can be addressed. That requires coming up with new business models, preparing the organization to operate and maintain virtualized networks, but it will also require the 5G, the underlying 5G network that enables and drives this network. So all of that together, we can call digital transformation of an operator. And it's not advisable to do only parts of it, but really to take the holistic approach and understand the full picture and the full what we call whole journey. Once you have the full journey in view, of course, then it requires detailed planning, which steps to do after which one, and what the most cost-effective way is to reach those targets. And this is why the planning of that transformation journey is a challenge, and this is why we are working with operators.
Excellent. Thank you, Helmut. Now, just as a kindness to us, we'd like you to respond to the poll question that's on your screen. How useful was this webinar to you? We'll find this really helpful in our future content planning. So if you could take a second to answer that, that would be very helpful. I guess we've given you enough time because they're quite easy questions. So we'll move on, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank today's panel, Roberto Company from Analysis Mason, and Vikas Dingler and Helmut Schober from Nokia. It's certainly been an interesting discussion, and I think there's a lot of complexities to take on board as we all move towards this bright 5G future. I've been George Malin, I'm managing editor of Vanilla Plus magazine. Thanks very much for attending today, and goodbye.